Another edition of Revolving Culture. We are the podcast that talks about culture and in all the ways that it revolves around us, because everything revolves around us. This week, we are talking about something near and dear to all of our hearts. That is arcade culture, the history of the arcade. We're kind of going to get into a lot of that discussion. We're really looking forward. We've got a lot of really fun stuff coming up. But as always, first, we kind of want to touch base and see where everybody's been. We would, however, be remiss if we did not take a moment to honor the man who taught us one of life's most important lessons. The bums will always lose. Mr. Big Lebowski himself, David Huddleston, has passed away this week. Those of us that are huge fans of the Big Lebowski, that's a passing of note. A strong men also cry. Does anybody else have any thoughts about the Big Lebowski moving on to the big bowling alley in the sky?
It's a bum's loss.
The bums won this time. It's just one of those things. I'm a big enough fan of the Big Lebowski that was kind of like that. Anybody of that movie that has passed on, I've lost a little bit of something. I adore the Big. It's one of those movies that quotes through my head on a regular basis.
Did he die this week?
Yeah. Just a couple of days ago.
Well, they'll probably do showings at the Inwood, midnight showings or something.
I wondered. There's a really cool movie theater at Grapevine, downtown Grapevine, that always shows vintage flicks. I wonder.
It's Grapevine, Texas, people. Just anybody that's listening.
That's right. Just in case. That's true. Grapevine, Texas. I apologize. I was caught in my regional. Nobody else lives anywhere but Texas. Haven't we established that already?
I mean,
I was wondering earlier when you said everything revolves around us, and
oh yeah,
I didn't realize you weren't a believer in heliocentricity. I've got some news for you, Marty.
Next thing you're going to tell me is the Earth's not flat, and at this point, then I'm sorry, all bets are off. You people are just going to have to do this on your own.
It's a shame about his passing. He's gone on to join his assistant, and
that's right. Brandt is up there too. I forgot about that. As always, I'm Marty. Let me introduce the rest of the panel. Go ahead.
I'm Robbie.
Andrew.
And Jeremy.
We are back in. We are minus the rock that holds us all together. Vicky is not with us this time. She's here in spirit, but we had other things going on, and so we're looking forward to the time when she gets back with us, and we can rock the whole fivesome. So, Robbie, what's been going on with your week so far?
Yesterday I got to spend some time with some friends at an event that's held here in Dallas every year, about in the pitch of summer, unfortunately, but that would be QuakeCon, which is nowadays sponsored by the Bethesda developer, and it's basically a giant LAN party for hundreds, if not thousands, of video game players from around the world. They come from the world over, and the hotel hosts an enormous local area network party for them, basically, that goes on for about 4 days straight. And there are people, in this community who just drink energy drinks the entire time and have pizzas delivered right to their seats, so that
Really?
they never
Wow.
have to they never have to unplug for even a moment. It's quite a sight. We typically don't participate in the what they call the bring your own computer room where the actual LAN is happening at. We just go to kind of people watch and check out everybody's. There's a lot of enthusiasts in the community who will build their own computers and take it a step further by modifying the cases and such. There's tons of pictures to be found online of the different clever modifications that people have. But yeah, it's always just a fun little glimpse into what's on the horizon for new games. They were unfortunately there was nothing playable on it, but there's going to be a new Quake game next year. I believe it's called Quake Champions, and as a longtime player of Quake and other such games, I'm excited to see what comes of it. So yeah, that was my day at QuakeCon. We had a lot of fun.
How long? Real quick, how long does QuakeCon go? Because I'm trying to picture.
It begins either on the Wednesday or Thursday, and then it continues through the Sunday of the. I believe that's right.
Wow.
I'm only ever there either on a Friday or a Saturday, so I don't.
I'm going to
know
have to
the
say
specifics.
that by Saturday evening, Sunday morning, you could probably bottle whatever funk is in that hotel and use it to like keep attackers at bay.
It's shameful to think about this, but in previous times when I've attended in the registration line, there had been signs hung that said, "Please be respectful of your neighbors. Please be certain to stay hygienic and
Take
use
a
deodorant."
shower.
And
I have a question for you. Like,
yes,
how loud does it get in there? Is it boisterous atmosphere, or is it quiet and solemn?
It is very quiet. It is like you could drop a pin practically. All you hear is fans. All you hear is the fans keeping all of those computers
And they click
cool.
People are listening to music.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Everyone's got their
everybody has
headphones
headphones on. You will occasionally, though, hear like an exultation of somebody who just pulled off something incredible, I suppose, and hear a roar from one side of the room. Yeah,
A litany of cursing as they.
yeah.
I was
Or
going to
that,
say,
yeah.
you'd hear me go, Andrew, what about you? What have you been up to this week?
I've been really busy this week in terms of just getting work done with the podcast and stuff. I did get time to watch The Wrestler the other night.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
yeah,
8
yeah.
years late to the party. Yeah.
You're ahead of me then. I still haven't seen it, and I own it.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
going
I've
to give it
owned it
another
for-
couple years.
You watch it every?
No, I said I'm going to give it another couple before I do. I haven't seen it either.
Complete the decade.
That's right.
No, it's an awesome film. If you haven't watched it in the past 8 years, it came out in 2008. Darren Aronofsky. It stars a weird-looking Mickey Rourke.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the actress's name?
Is
in
it Tia Leone? Is that
No,
right?
similar in name. She was on My Cousin Vinny.
Not Tia Leone. What's her name? She was
Marissa
in the-
Tomei?
Marissa Tomei.
Tomei,
Oh
yeah,
man,
yeah,
she
yeah.
is still beautiful. Well, 8 years ago she was still beautiful.
Well,
She's our new Aunt May.
she's
Civil
still
War
beautiful
approved
as the
it.
aunt
Yes.
in Spider-Man's Aunt May. That was an uncomfortable feeling for someone who spent his entire life knowing Aunt May to be a grandmotherly old woman who just wants you to eat your wheat cakes, and then suddenly in the middle of the Captain America movie is a smoking hot Aunt May. I feel a
In
little
fairness, though,
uncomfortable
it's
about
you
that.
got to wonder about like the canonical like idea of Aunt May, where it's like, okay, is this a great aunt? Because she's always had that grandmotherly image, and it's
yeah.
like, how old were his parents? I don't know enough about Spider-Man's history to know if that's ever been
as far
clarified.
as his parents go, I don't. And there's
Yeah.
been so many changes over the years. Who knows what's considered canon? And
I
what's
haven't
not.
read a Spider-Man book since Ultimate, like around 2003 or so.
Bendis's quippery Spider-Man.
Yeah, before they introduced the Miles.
Rags Morales. No.
Miles Sanchez. He's got
Miles Morales.
Morales. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, The Wrestler was really great. I also tried. I have it in my notes as tried Dark Souls 3. I played it for 15 minutes, laughed in frustration, and quit. And
Did you make it out of the graveyard area?
no. I came to this like Goliath,
The lizard?
sitting.
Oh, the dude with the sword?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you pull the sword out.
He's
and-
pretty hard for a first boss.
Oh my god! A friend had warned me that early on you meet one of the more difficult opponents in the game, and you just have to get through that, and it gets a little bit easier. But I couldn't get through it. So
Yeah, I again, it's one of those things. I know my limitations. I would shudder to even try, because 5 minutes into it, it'd be, and then you just throw something against a wall.
Yeah, and any other game would guide you away from the encounter that you were having, but that's one of those hallmarks of them is, no, we're going to let you find out the hard way that's not the direction you're supposed to go in the game. Yeah.
Hold on, am I not supposed to fight that guy?
Oh, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not
you
are. Okay, my mistake.
There's an optional monster that you can fight that's almost just as difficult. It's like,
This is not a spoiler. This is like literally within the first 10 minutes of playing the game.
Yeah.
it's just a challenging game.
Yeah. I'll pick it back up. It was fun to play, and figuring out the mechanics. This is only my second time attempting to play this series. And,
Yeah.
I guess this kind of rolls into what we're talking about today. I also wanted to say that I watched Batman versus Superman, another thing I'm a little late to, but not 8 years this time.
No.
It's not good. Okay.
No, it's not good.
Take it away.
I will be a dissenting opinion on that. I really enjoyed it, but that's my expectation bar was set so low, I think, that because it wasn't abysmally terrible, I was just like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
They
you're right.
made a competent Batman Superman.
It wasn't, like you said, it was not a horrible movie. It was just a little disappointing for some parts of it were disappointing. Visually, an amazingly striking movie in a lot of scenes, but
it's weird because I acknowledge everyone else's criticisms. I know what they're talking about. I can see it. But for me personally, I came out of that movie. I expected to come out of that movie going like, meh, whatever. And I came out of that movie going like, bring on the Justice League. If it's like this, I'm ready for it. And then they kind of said, we're going to kind of change it. And now I'm back to like, okay, so I'm ambivalent again because now it's going to be different. And then because again, I've determined I'm clearly in the minority in this opinion, worldwide amongst, not just this table, but our people in general. So I acknowledge that in this case, I'm going to be kind of the odd man out, but man, I would have loved to have seen a Justice League movie that followed that same sort of really dark, really bleak.
yeah. Have you watched the
I don't know what it
JLA
is about
teaser?
me, but I loved it.
Have you watched the JLA teaser?
Yeah, and the trailer I saw for it increased my ambivalence.
Yeah.
When I saw the Flash scene, it kind of went like, I just saw this in Civil War. This exact scene I just saw with Tony Stark. And
They really
Peter
seem
Parker.
to be going for an Avengers.
Yeah, and again, that's where I'm kind of like, back to the old Time Warner DC. Meh. All right, fine. At least I've got Marvel. That's fine.
So that's what I had going on this week.
Jeremy, how about yourself? What did you do this week?
Well, to continue with the topic of challenging games, I hooked my PC back up to do some graphic work on it, and remembered that I had all these Nintendo and Super Nintendo ROMs on there. So, of course, I had to fire up Castlevania, and that game it's hard to stop playing, but once you get to like the third level, it's hard to stop throwing the controller down. So you gotta just walk away from it. I tried some games that I hadn't played before. One called Werewolf. I think it was Super Nintendo. I can't remember. It was terrible. But it sounded, I was like, Werewolf, I've never heard of that. So I tried it out. It was terrible. And then First Samurai, I had never heard that, but I thought it sounded cool. And it was just a really bad game.
There were more than their fair share of really bad games coming out on some of those consoles.
The guys that I was at QuakeCon with, we used to occasionally have parties where we would load up an emulator and have it randomly load,
really?
a ROM from hundreds of unplayed NES games, and just to see how bad they could really be.
That's a good idea.
Well, you think it is,
Yeah,
and then
that's true.
And then in practice, as long as you're having fun with it, but yeah, there's some real stinkers from back then. We remember the good ones for a reason.
Yeah.
So you were hitting the vintage games, huh?
I was in the vintage games, and took me back.
Well, you're about to go farther back because I think at this point we're going to take a short break. When we come back, I think we will get into the meat of arcades and arcade culture and arcade history, which is kind of the topic of our discussion today. So if you'll be back with us, we'll be back in just a moment.
In the two-dimensional world of video dots and dashes, flat blips and formless blobs, one video arcade game soars a dimension above the rest. Saxon! Experience the control as you climb and dive. Feel the power as you attack and evade. Discover a new level of excitement with the true feel of action in 3 dimensions. Saxon, from the master design engineers of Sega.
And welcome back to Revolving Culture, the podcast about revolving culture and culture that revolves. And today we're talking about arcades, arcade culture, the sort of birth and evolution of the arcade game and the culture surrounding it that I've just repeated twice. So I really the history of this thing, I thought this was interesting. You guys were mentioning earlier, the history of this goes way farther back than what I would consider my personal sort of exposure to arcades, which was the late 70s and going into the early 80s. Jeremy, you found out some really interesting early history about sort of the arcade game in general.
Yeah, it goes back to the early 1900s. A lot of the design and the aesthetic appeal of the arcade came from places like Coney Island, entertainment places that people gathered at to play games, maybe skee ball and stuff like that. But they started making more, I guess, standalone games and made them coin operated so that they could, I guess you instead of paying somebody to do something, you just pay the machine.
Yeah.
So you could play games like pinball, the weird, creepy fortune telling robots, slot machines. We were talking about this earlier. Peep shows, they were not pornographic originally. You would just look in a hole. You would pay the thing. The hole would open up, and you could look at like a sailboat on some water or something.
Yeah, Nickelodeons.
Yeah, Nickelodeons. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah. So it seems that that was pretty popular for, from 1910 to into the 30s and 40s, as long as the Coney Island sort of carnival experience is popular.
You could kind of see it as the beginning of machines taking the place of workers. And
So
a controversial subject nowadays, and that was they were the first ones to experience that, I think.
Yeah, and I have some notes, kind of a timeline leading up to arcades in the 80s. In 1927, a company called Gottlieb and Company was founded in Chicago. They built the first successful coin-operated game, which was called Baffle Ball. It was created by David Gottlieb, the founder of that company. That was 1931. 1932, Bally was founded, later rebranded as Bally Technologies, Inc. January 21st, 1942 through 1976. Just a tidbit. We were talking about it in private, but pinball machines were banned in New York City because of legal gray area between games of skill and gambling. And we also kind of went into the criminal aspect to why they were banned as well.
Well, and that's interesting because that's maybe the first time that there's the first point in its history where what we think of as the arcade game or the sort of electronic entertainment becomes controversial. I mean, and from there on, it's going to have a long and varied history of different people finding different parts of it controversial for different reasons. But that's interesting that's the first part of it, and it seems to be tied in with organized crime, and it's because really an arcade game, especially a pinball machine, is a step and a half away from a one-armed bandit. I mean, you can kind of see why a local politician, looking to get votes is going to point that out and go like, hey, we're regulating the one-armed bandits. Why are we letting them play these evil pinball machines?
Yeah. Going past that, in 1943, the Williams Company was founded. 1958, Midway was founded. 1961, an MIT alum, Steve Russell, developed Space War, I think on campus. which was kind of the first computer game.
Yeah, I could see that.
1971, Computer Space was the first commercially sold coin-operated video game and was designed by who would later go on to found Atari, Noah Bushnell and Ted Dabney. It was considered a failure at the time. The game was revolutionary and formed, the foundations and basis of what would later become the arcade industry. A little bit of trivia for that. It was also featured in Soylent Green, amongst other films.
Yeah, you guys were saying the cabinet on that particular machine was something to see. I'm not familiar enough with it to know what was it about the cabinet that made it particularly attractive.
It just looks. I thought it looked like something that Stanley Kubrick would have put in 2001, like as a piece of the spaceship or something. It was
really
just a very soft, curved, elegant fiberglass design. Yeah, with this, but with this bulbous like screen, it looked like a head.
Yeah,
and then the controls jutting out of the front. It just was very futuristic.
Its shape was reminiscent. I don't know what the character's name, but on WALL-E, the other robot.
The female.
Yeah, the female robot. It was kind of reminiscent in shape to that robot. So 1972, a year after a man named Alan Alcorn developed Pong for the first console, which is Magnavox's Odyssey. It didn't play quite right, so they used the basis of that to make a better version, which they put into an arcade cabinet and placed at Andy Capp's Tavern in Sunnyvale, California. And that was kind of the birth of arcades in a public atmosphere.
Oh yeah, Pong is kind of the granddaddy of what we both the arcade and the home consoles, because that's really the first home console video game. Anything that's manufactured is Pong. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember, in a house with that Pong machine, and it looked like an Atari 20, roughly kind of like an Atari 2600 with a little, but there was no cartridge. It was just, you bought a machine that was going to play Pong on your television. It's all encompassing. There is no adaptation. You're not putting anything else in there. You just gone and bought Pong.
Yeah. In a world where there's only one game, the question of does this play other games is moot. Yeah.
Weren't there sheets that you could lay over the TV
Yeah,
screen?
they did have these little
turn
things
into
you could
different
print out,
games.
But
playing
then
tennis.
it became like then it was airplanes, and you were shooting at each other. And I had almost forgotten about that. But I knew somebody that had those little sort of, they looked like the thing your teacher puts on the overhead projector. They looked like that. They were just the size of, this is the day of the television as furniture, where it's this giant cabinet and then the screen is like in the middle of this giant cabinet with speakers on each side. And you just put it right on there, and then suddenly it's a whole different world. No, you're still playing Pong.
That same year, 1972, I already mentioned that Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney went on to found Atari. And we were talking about this earlier in the week, that Bushnell was forced out of Atari at one point and also went on to found Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah,
really?
There's
Showbiz Entertainment.
That's
Nolan
cool.
Bushnell, and I mentioned this when he and I were talking about this.
Showbiz
Nolan
Pizza.
Bushnell is the closest representation to Tony Stark I have ever seen in real life, because he is the true futurist. He was the guy that knew what people wanted 10 years ahead. And he's kind of the father of the arcade culture. So it's appropriate that his name obviously comes up here.
Sure.
But besides Pong and forming Atari, when Atari kicked him out essentially and said, we don't need you anymore, they invoked his no compete clause. So for 10 years, he had to find something else to do that wasn't in any way related to video games. What? So he created a kiosk that he could put in a mall, and it had a laser disc in it and a screen, and you shopped on this kiosk. You paid for it. You ordered it. You placed order for jeans or socks or these shirts or this camera. And I'm a little fuzzy on how they then gathered those orders. I don't know if there was a printout that somebody came and got each week and then processed the orders, and whatever you ordered would then be shipped to your house. So before there's an internet, he had created an online shopping experience. And that didn't really go a long way. So he created Chuck E. Cheese. It's like, there's a place for kids to come and play arcade games. And his thing was our profit margin is in cheap pizza. Kids don't give a crap about how high quality this pizza is. We need cheese. We need pepperoni. We need to be cheap on both. We don't need and the board of directors kept going like, but our pizza tastes like crap. And he's like, well, then don't eat it. But the kids love it. They're playing the games. We're making money. He goes on vacation or on a short leave of absence while he's gone. They were like, our pizza sucks. So they ordered all of these high quality ingredients. We're going to make our pizza better. Their profit margin started to sink. They went, this is your fault. Our profit margin started. You're the head of the company and our profits. So then they fired him they released him from that. He's always seems 10 years ahead. Like he created a website in the late 90s, he and his family, full of very simple, quick games that you could play online. And no heavy RPGs, but it's
Flash games.
It's the 10-year precursor to Farmville, Bejeweled, Candy Crush. Simple games that anybody can sit down and play leisurely, 10 minutes. You've played with your friend online and no one, I just think the world would have been buried in money if everyone would just at some point in time finally realize, just listen to the guy. But he's always been that one step ahead and he gives everybody the leisure to decide they don't need him anymore.
Wow.
And I said there's probably an entire biography that could be done on this guy. He's a real amazing character.
That's
but
incredible.
it's appropriate to see his name because he really is he and his partners were the people who brought us the games that we love and
further into 1972, obviously a banner year for arcades and video games overall. Breakout was created it was built by Steve Wozniak and he was aided by Steve Jobs. It was based loosely on Pong because what else did they have at the time? Later on, 1978, Space Invaders was created. 1979, the Atari programmers David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead. They leave Atari to form Activision. 1981, Defender is a Williamson product. 1980, we have Pac-Man, a debut of Pac-Man by Namco, and then released in the U.S.
Big
under
staple.
Midway's.
Yeah, that's a milestone. At that point, that really kicks off, I think.
Addictive gaming, just
the arcade culture at that point, because Pac-Man became such a phenomenon that everyone wanted to play it. So everyone had to have some place to play it. And there's, Space Invaders. And as Pac-Man was making money and people were making small arcades, these companies were like, well, there's money to be made in them with our games. And so it starts a sort of gold rush where everyone's making games and you got to have a place so arcades were starting to become a place with a much wider variety of games to play.
Yeah.
And it really at Pac-Man is when it really hits that peak and then suddenly there's money to be made and everybody's getting into, everybody wins. The game makers were making games. Kids were playing the games. Everyone was spending the money and making the money. And it's like so much of a boom economy. It's going to have its downside, but man, Pac-Man kicks off the boom period of arcades.
Yeah, I was watching, while I was doing my research, I watched a couple of documentaries on it and read a lot of articles. And one person put it really well. It was Pac-Man was really easy to play. It was fun and easy to play, but it was really difficult to master. And they kind of found that balance.
To this day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like it's one of those things that today's gamer can sit down at and go, oh, this is simple. Blah, 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 blah. It's as hard for somebody an 18-year-old trying to play it today as it was for an 18-year-old trying to play it in 1980.
Something that I was thinking about with a lot of these games that are like Asteroids, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, the playability, the replayability, and the difficulty are timeless. Generation to generation.
Yeah, the ones that stuck around. And when you think about it, that's really the objective, in the commercial sense of these machines is I need somebody who's otherwise completely unfamiliar with this, who hears the buzzing and the blinking lights and is drawn over to this machine. I need them in, just a matter of a few moments to be able to really grok what the objective is.
Right.
And I need it to be presented simply enough that they can immediately understand the objective of the game, and but also be difficult enough that when they fail at it, that they feel compelled, well, I understand the system a little bit more now, and I'm going to iteratively keep trying until I, keep mounting each challenge and, clear each board of Pac-Man and arrive at the next totally fresh challenge. And that's what kept people locked into it and what made it a profitable
chasing
idea.
That dragon of the getting your initials on the number one spot in the high score. Yeah. Man, that was in the arcade culture of the late 70s, early 80s. Man, that's where the gunslingers were.
Yeah.
You were looking for those initials up at the top of that screen, and they stayed there. When those screens would go idle, if nobody was playing Q*bert, you'd see the list and you'd look over it and you'd see, you happen to know your buddy's 3-letter code, and boy, there he is at the number one spot. Yeah, that can't stand. So then now you've got to. Yeah, that was a chase that, I don't want to know how many millions of dollars worth of quarters were spent. People trying to get that high score on stuff like Zaxxon and Pac-Man and Donkey Kong.
And you still get that same rush from those games. I was at an arcade. It was an arcade/bar, but a pretty formidable arcade in Chicago. Recently, a friend of mine worked there and helps rebuild arcade machines and old pinball machines and stuff like that. But I was playing Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man, and sitting there, if you start to get the hang of it, your adrenaline level starts to go up. You get that steady breath and start to sweat a little bit, especially got a few drinks in you. And was having a great time, but of course I'm awful at it.
That's that free play here in the Richardson area here in Dallas Fort Worth. I got there within like the first week that they were open. Might have been the first couple of days that they were open. And I got there at like opening time is 3:00 in the afternoon. And it's as close to a legitimate 1982 arcade feel as you're going to get anywhere ever, without a time machine or a DeLorean that goes 88 miles an hour. And I played like Q*bert and Burger Time, and I think maybe Beer Tapper. That's important. Not Root Beer Tapper, the original Beer Tapper. And getting, because I was one of the newest people playing on these machines, not quite so hard to get a high score, but man, the feeling of playing Q*bert and playing Burger Time and playing Beer Tapper and putting MAR in the number one slot on that high score. I have not had that rush since 1983. It's one of those things that I was immediately taking a picture of it with my phone, which is the 40 years colliding with each other immediately. I took a picture with my computer phone that's 8,000 times more powerful than this game I just played. But man, I was awash and like, I remember what that felt like when you'd finally climbed that mountain and your initials were sitting at number one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things I wish hadn't gone away. Like that raw and experience of the arcades of the early 80s and late 70s. I kind of wish that feeling hadn't gone away. But like anything else, it's going to have its ups and downs and it's going to evolve. Yeah. But that where you put your quarter up, somebody's playing Zaxxon or playing Defender, you put your quarter on you're next in line. Mm-hmm. And you would get rivalry. You two guys working on the same machine would just be trading back off because you're beating his score. So now he's got to beat your score. And now you've got to try and beat his score and he's got to try and beat his score to put the margin between you and him even higher.
I was recently at round one in Arlington. We'd taken my wife and her niece and nephew with us, and he was playing some Japanese import fighting game, which I'd never heard of before, but he was really excited to see it. He's an anime kid. And,
was it Lugaru?
Huh?
Was it Lugaru?
I have no idea, to be honest.
I think it was 75 of those games over there.
He was he sat down, he beat the living snot out of two guys who tried to challenge him. And then this guy walks up. He's a little older than the nephew, but younger than myself, walks up with the most calm, cool looking stance, sits down, and then just proceeds to destroy the nephew. And my nephew is like, we walk away from it and he's upset with himself, but he's also so excited about having had that experience.
Yeah, he got a challenge.
It was a lot of fun to see that.
That exact same dynamic would occur in the early 80s arcades. You'd get some guy who in 1982 was in his 30s, he was playing Donkey Kong and he's really rocking it hard, and then he'd step aside proud that there's his initials high up on the leaderboard, and then a 12-year-old kid would walk up, drop a quarter in there, and your skill in those games sort of dictated how much value you got out of a quarter. Because if you were good enough, a quarter could last you 3.5 hours, 4 hours. If you were that good at a game, it wasn't that unheard of. Or if you sucked, a quarter gave you about a minute and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's to go back a moment to when Marty was just describing the chase for the high score, and you were getting maybe a little nostalgic about the idea of what's happened to that and why doesn't that exist anymore. And I just wanted to interject, and I think that it's kind of false to say that it doesn't exist anymore, because what Andrew's story is illustrative that it does still exist. It's being given to a new generation, and
I think because we're starting to get arcades back again. I mean, I think that's maybe the hub of that is arcades exist again for the first on a much broader scale than they had for the last 25 years since the early 90s.
I was just thinking about all this as well. And those games had a cap. They had a maximum rank that you could achieve. Maybe you could outdo someone who scored higher than you, and then they you. But there was always number one. Like you could not go to 1+1 or something. Yeah. With games today, video game developers will give you a maximum level or something that you can attain, and then all the gamers who play really well and blow through those levels and get all the nice benefits of being high level and ranked up and everything, they want more. And so the developers go back and give them higher levels, more skills to apply to their things or whatever. You don't have that with arcades. Like, you're always competing for that one spot.
Yeah.
And the competitive culture today with high scores or leveling or ranking the level is always going up.
And then you have specialized ways of completing a game, like speed runs and things of that nature, which
and then we're talking about achievements, which is kind of a watered down, sort of tepid version of a high score rank, but now those things you're getting. Congratulations!
I don't think it's tepid. It's just structured. It's not. I think it's unfair to say that it's somehow like diminished from
valuable.
It's just that it's structured. It has a. There's somebody outlining what it is. It's no longer you setting your own boundary for in whichever game I'm going to in Pac-Man I'm going to get to a kill screen. It's somebody saying, letting via this achievement system that here's something that can be achieved in this game, and do you have the skill or whatever to attain that?
Right.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I was maybe more painting it with a general brush, because the bottom tiers of those achievements are so I've seen achievements where you started the game. Here's an achievement.
Right. Sure. And that's worthy of criticism.
That's maybe where I was.
I don't know if anyone else is familiar with this, but I forget the title of it, but there's an old Flash game that was very literally that, Marty, where it was achievements of the game, and literally everything that you did in it resulted in it. But like anything, like Jeremy described, it's if these experiences are meant to be iterative, where you're constantly arriving back at it with the same objective, it's got to be baby steps, So, but I think we're kind of moving away from arcade games maybe and talking more about
gaming in general.
Yeah, because a lot of arcade games don't have that progression system. It's much more about mastering an existent system, kind of when I think of all of the 1v1 fighting games, which really are what fueled 90s arcade gaming. In my mind, it's more about, you can look at them almost like you would look at something like chess, where this is an extant system that, the rules are laid out in stone. It's not going to change. No one has, an advantage over you besides experience. There's no mechanical advantage. They're not a higher level than you or something like that. It's your mastery of the system, put to test against other people. And again, there's no, achievement system or anything like that. And those kind of games, yes, there's a high score leaderboard. But it's less about that. And it's more about proving to the community of people that are standing there and playing with you that, yes, I'm top dog. I'm, you're welcome to put your quarter up next and see if you can take me off of this system. But until you do,
I kind of find that interesting I think the bridge between, it's weird that to my mind, the bridge between the early 80s arcade, which was a personal achievement thing. There was one screen, one joystick, by and large. I mean, there was 2-player games, but it was, by and large, it was an individual accomplishment thing. And then in the mid to late 80s, very early 90s, you got what I would consider to be kind of cooperative multiplayer games where there were 4 places at the table and, like X-Men, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah. And once the technology got to the point where they could put 2 screens, 4 joysticks, however that cabinet is being built, they would, hey, we can get more than one person standing at the table at a time or more than 2 people. Then it evolves and suddenly that mid 90s arcade is very much a me versus you direct competition. And I thought it was interesting that the bridge there is more cooperative, because in the age of that X-Men, Simpsons, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games, you would find yourself with another kid chunking quarters in because they let you keep I mean, that was the money sink is they developed at that point, the term of like, want to keep playing from where you just stopped?
Yeah, you almost killed the boss. One more shot.
And so you were like, it may have cost you $30 in quarters, you and your buddy, but by gosh, you beat the X-Men game, or you beat the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
That's when you leave your friend to keep pressing the start player button and resetting the continue screen while you run to the table that your mom's sitting at, chatting with the other moms and beg for 6 more quarters. That was it was like you said, it truly was a cooperative system in the sense that if you didn't have that other person there, you had 30 seconds to run back to that table, get those quarters, and put them back in. Yeah,
before you bellied up to that table.
I had just a couple more dates that were of note. 1981, Donkey Kong was conceived by Shigeru Miyamoto, and in 1983, the same developer would be instrumental in the creation of Mario Brothers Arcade, which would go on to be one of the...
Yeah, if we're going to talk Nolan Bushnell, Miyamoto is another name that goes on that Mount Rushmore prominently as far as arcade and video games go. I mean, that's another fountainhead moment.
He loved like the Beatles, and he played banjo. Was just such an interesting person.
Didn't he have a part in the Adam Sandler Pixels?
Oh, I couldn't tell you.
I'd swear the trailer has a thing where they've gotten him to talk to Pac-Man. The giant Pac-Man that's been destroying the town, and he thinks, Pac-Man is good, and he's my son, and he's peaceful, and he tries to talk to this Pac-Man. I'm almost positive that's not an actor. I think they got Miyamoto to do that, and it's. I haven't seen the movie because it's an Adam Sandler movie, and I have views about those sorts of things. But that was the one thing in that trailer that went like, that's hysterical. Is the showdown between Miyamoto and the anthropomorphic Pac-Man.
2 other dates of note, which will kind of lead us into the competitive gaming and where things stand and the, I guess, arcade culture nowadays. Is 1987, Street Fighter, the first Street Fighter came out, which was immortalized in the movie Juice, Tupac and Omar Epps. In 1991, the same year as Nevermind's debut and a lot of other cultural what landmarks
death
was
of
Street
Paramount.
Fighter 2, which improved on all the mechanics from Street Fighter and just kind of showed the road to the competitive type of
it is the example into the genre of what
Yeah.
when you think of a fighting game nowadays, it always goes back to Street Fighter.
It's the font from which all others have flown, whether it's Soul Calibur or Tekken. I mean, none of those Mortal Kombat, those all flow directly out of a game that evolved from its initial creation, which was more of a Streets of Rage kind of just straight platform beat 'em up, to like, there's an article somewhere in a magazine that I pick up when I can, which is based strangely enough, out of Britain, called, it's like Retro Gamer magazine. And they did an entire article on the history of Street Fighter. And it's a long and storied history that really brings, it's inarguable that it created the second renaissance of the arcade in the mid 90s. And developed the concept of me versus you in direct competition, not a who gets the higher score, but who just whooped whose butt.
Yeah.
And that's bragging rights there. And that's face to face bragging rights is a more powerful lure even than those 3-letter initials at the top of a high score screen.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at specifically Street Fighter 2 is the example by which, in that kind of, iterative game where, the most important thing for that kind of game is you have all of these asymmetric characters who, are functionally doing the same thing, but they all behave differently. They have different, abilities and special moves and such. It's important to find the balance in the competitive idea of making sure that there's no one, high nail that stands out above the pack, because then anyone who is playing it competitively, that becomes the obvious choice. And this is true of any kind of, asymmetric, design concept. But I remember I used to think it was so strange when I was a kid that, okay, so there's Street Fighter 2, and then there's Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition, and then there's Super Street Fighter 2, and then there's Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And as a kid, I the only thing that I was really perceiving changing was, they're adding more to the roster, and so they're just kind of like diming it out like that, like, now this version you can play an additional roster of characters.
We've added a Native American.
Yeah. but in reality, like, not only was it that, but it was also them behind the scenes making very slight tweaks to the behavior of the patches. What would be a patch nowadays? Rebalancing, and that rebalancing was based on the feedback of the really hardcore competitive players from across the country and across the world, even, who were giving them feedback and saying this particular moveset or whatever is simply too powerful. We're all relying on this. You need to dial it back so that there's other sensible, and likewise, this character isn't being picked because they're perceived as weak compared to what is normally being picked. Bump them up, and the idea of nerfs and bumping, that was all occurring during those iterations.
Yeah, that article, it really charts the reasoning behind every evolution of that title. And yeah, you're right. It's one of those things that, and I think because it continued to do that, it's to this day is I guess valid's not the word I'm looking for. It's a franchise that's still respected and still means something. It's not a purely nostalgia factor. It's still relevant, I guess, is maybe the best word I was looking for.
Yeah, it's fair to call it relevant. Even those older titles, because there's something that occurs every year, much like QuakeCon. QuakeCon is kind of the picture of computer gaming at any one moment, like a snapshot of what that culture is experiencing. But the fighting game culture, which goes well beyond Street Fighter, there's dozens of titles at this point. That all culminates in the competitive environment in an event called Evolution, which the most recent competition just occurred a couple of weeks ago, and specifically the newest version of Street Fighter V, the championship for Street Fighter V was broadcasted from Evolution by ESPN2, and that kind of speaks to the fact that is the one unto which the fighting community looks at as this is the real bar for what
still to this day.
what this is what this means to us in the competitive sense, is it revolves around disc games specifically.
Well, and maybe that's as good a point to sort of segue us into when we come back from this break. We're going to talk about this new evolution of competitive gaming, the Major League Gaming, the stuff online. So we're going to hit that and sort of look at that is becoming more the future of the arcade culture. So stick around with us. We'll be back in just a minute, and we'll carry on with Revolving Culture.
Of Friendly Planet. Yellow creature gobbles dots while being pursued through maze by monsters. Believe it or not, those things are really happening on 200 electronic video games here at Chicago Fest. What you see here is part of a national phenomenon that we call high-tech rec, a phenomenon that had to happen when the TV set married the computer. It starts with a quarter.
Welcome back to Revolving Culture. We are talking about arcades, arcade games, the arcade culture. And right before we went on break, we were starting to touch on the competitive aspect as it's evolved in the arcades, which as it's continued to evolve, I think we're reaching a point now in the mid 2010s. I don't know what the official name for the 2010s might be, but as we're reaching this point, the competitive aspect of arcade games has reached the point where it's broadcast on television. There is careers built on playing. There's the architect, there's the doctor, the lawyer, and there's somebody making the equivalent amount of money, if not more so. What do you do for a job? I play arcade games, or I play computer games, or I play PC games. That's an interesting evolution that it's now becoming so mainstream. You can now watch on ESPN2. Robbie sort of hinted at it earlier. You can watch people playing these games on ESPN2 as a sports broadcast. It's starting to be seen. The official name I think for it now is eSports, but it's starting to be increasingly accepted as a sport. I've heard brief rumblings that it's one of those things everybody wants to make an Olympic sport at some point in time. It's one of the, I don't see it happening, in the next 10 or 15 years, but the fact that that's even an idea couched that's not followed by hysterical laughter, maybe says something about the degree with which we're beginning to accept that there is a certain form of athleticism in being the upper echelon of talent in a particular, type of video game.
Yeah, I want to be the first to say that as supportive I am of video games in general, and I think they're wonderful things that virtually everyone should engage in at some point. At no point do I think it should be considered part of the capital O Olympics, because that really is a series of sports based around stretching the human body to its sensical limits.
I would agree with you, but
and that's not to say that the mind isn't also, because that's where you would see the differences there between competitors, is who has the fastest reaction times and can.
They've tried for decades to get the chess to be an Olympic sport.
That's true,
I don't think it's going to happen, but it's worth noting that, and I don't know that I would want to see it happen. I'm like you, Robbie.
Yeah.
But it is worth noting that it's a thing that is at least talked about with a certain degree of seriousness.
Yeah.
Again, somebody doesn't say that, and the rest of the world didn't just go. That's really cute. No, everybody went like, not really. I mean, we have to talk about it. The fact that we're having to have a discussion about it says something.
A long enough timeline, yeah.
And competitive gaming isn't exactly in its infancy. I found that the earliest known video game competition took place on October 19th, 1972 at Stanford for the game Space War, which we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. The Stanford students were invited to an intergalactic Space War Olympics with quotations around it. It was a 5-man tournament, which was won by a man named Bruce Baumgart, and his grand prize was a year's subscription to Rolling Stone. So things have changed over the years. This would continue in 1980. Space Invaders Championship was held by Atari. It was the largest scale video game competition at the time. It had 10,000 participants from across the United States. And this would continue into the 1990s with Nintendo World Championships, which were held at Universal Studios Hollywood in California. There was also Blockbuster Video had its own video game championship series as well. So those are just a couple.
Well, and bridging that point of time between the 1980 and 1990. In 81, Walter Day, sort of took it upon himself, this guy from Ottumwa, Iowa, took it upon himself to start traveling to arcades, and he would start writing down the high score, who held the high score in specific games. He later goes ahead and gets back to Ottumwa, Iowa, starts up his own arcade called Twin Galaxies, which to this day is sort of the Guinness Book of World Records for like the official record keeper for arcade console, for any video games. If you want to actually be designated as a world record holder in a particular game or a particular feat in a particular game, it's not official if it is not, sort of, acknowledged by Twin Galaxies. And he had, there in Ottumwa, Iowa, Twin Galaxies hosted several, team versus team. Like they hosted he invited like the best players across the nation to come to Ottumwa, like Life magazine and maybe Time came and documented it. And they had a competition, to find the best arcade game player in the world. And we're talking 82, 83. He had the team, 2 teams, one from California, one from South Carolina that came in and he pitted, these 2 regional teams against each other. I believe Cal won, which maybe not all that surprising because California was a hotbed. I mean, Silicon Valley was just starting to become a thing at that point in time. So that's really where all of this was germinating from. But yeah, there's always been, to a certain degree, there's always been somebody wanting to showcase this competitive gaming and to name the best of the best, in a very Karate Kid sort of way. And now Twitch streams. I mean, I don't know where does that factor in? Because a majority of the Twitch streams tend, at least the ones that I have seen, don't tend to be competitive in nature. They're more of a passive, just an observation. You're essentially just watching someone play a game rather than, watching a competition.
I think that some Twitch players will take like challenge suggestions from viewers.
Really?
And so if the viewers want to see them play a game a certain way, and then we talked about speedrunning earlier, if they want to speedrun in just their underwear with only a dagger or something like that. I think that some players will do that for their viewers because, as we talked about earlier, they're also patrons and they will, help to fund these players' rent and stuff like that.
Certainly, yeah. To elaborate on what Jeremy was saying, the idea that trying to once you've mastered a particular game, but you don't necessarily want to stop playing with it, and so you have to create your own parameters of challenges under which will create a new interest for you in it. There's a thing that happens a lot nowadays that could be considered competing against the system itself, and that's things like speedruns. Mm-hmm. And that really began with a group of guys who were doing a thing called a Quake Done Quick. And the entire objective is how quickly can I get from point A to point B, in a level from the original Quake game. And that idea has continued on now into the idea of speed runs and let's plays. And you see these things. A lot of charity events will host speed runs where someone will arrive and perform for an audience a flawless speed run of a particular game.
Didn't you see a concert? Was it a Proto Man concert?
Yes, yeah.
Where somebody was playing Mega Man while the band played the music.
Yes, a few months ago, some friends and I attended. Yeah, it was pretty cool. So to give a quick summary of what Marty was just mentioning, I saw a concert for a band called the Proto Men, but that's not what I really want to talk about. What I want to talk about is it's fine. Totally check out the Proto Men though. They're amazing. But one of the opening acts was a group of guys called Bit Brigade, and their shtick is they perform the score, the soundtrack to a video game live, but they're not just up there, going through the motions, playing these songs. They also had, a member of the band who was not playing an instrument. I guess you could call it an instrument. He, for their performance for us, he was playing Mega Man 2, and he was actually on stage, playing an admittedly an altered version of it because they have to strip out the sound from the game because the band itself is providing the score. But, that person in the flesh, played through, a speed run of Mega Man 2, during which, the band was providing the score for each level and, all of the transitions, for instance, he arrives at the boss and that changes the music and they played every musical cue and the amount of coordination, between, you really have to consider him a part of the band at that point because his, if you think of the idea that all these instruments are relying on each other, they're relying on him to hit his cues just as much as he's relying on them to hit theirs. And it was so delightful and it was so much fun. And as it was happening, like, none of me and my friends who were watching it knew what was going on until it was actually happening. We saw this guy setting up and it's like, what is he doing? Are they going to be like projecting something? No way. He's actually going to play it. And it was so much fun. I'm sure they have videos online, but I wholly recommend to check out both the Proto Man and Bit Brigade.
Yeah, to kind of elaborate on what you were talking about, as far as him being another member of the group and having to have the timing down and everything, I recently tried to play Mega Man 2 with the Mega Man collection, and I got, once again, like 10 minutes into the game.
I have never played a Mega Man game.
It is very difficult.
Like I've at least tried for 5 minutes a Zelda game, but the Zelda franchise and the Mega Man franchise are enormous holes in like my video gaming sort of knowledge base. I have never played a Mega Man game, and I'm at this point, I'm probably going to get mugged in the street by somebody going, "Just go play the damn game."
It takes a certain patience, but I got to witness a true master of the form, and it was a lot of fun. I forgot how we even arrived at that. Oh yeah, so speedruns. All that to say that that is another thing that really should be considered competitive gaming is people playing against the system. There was some press recently about a person, a blind man who managed to complete the Zelda Ocarina of Time game, I believe, completely blind, and he was admittedly altering the system. He was using an emulator for save states and such, but I think that we can permit a little a little fairness, considering he had absolutely no visual cue to work upon.
To play a game like that without seeing it, just based solely on, it's one of those things that I could see it, like you're really tired, you're playing your console at 2 a.m. and you're just like, this seems like a kind of fun idea, and it's a short-lived idea because you're going to die in a hurry.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's interesting that video games and arcade games have become so much more, and maybe evolving along with the more prevalent existence of geek culture now in the mainstream. More and more and more and more of what you would have 20 years ago would have called muggles to the comic book video game world. It's now there's a huge audience, as evidenced by the box office draw of superhero movies. It's interesting. I mean, there's concerts or symphony orchestras will play, music from all sorts of video games. I can remember listening to, we've worked in stores together in retail environments, and part of my job would be to put audio CDs in to play on the overhead of the store and maybe sell. And we had a copy of a live concert called Video Games Live. And every one of those that I got in, I would put in the overhead, and that particular disc would not get finished playing in the overhead before it would be bought every time. And you could hear the crowd like picking up on visual cues of the performance. Like there's one in the middle of the performance, the next piece starts, and you just hear this sort of build it, dun, 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 and then a choir just goes Sega, and the crowd goes freaking, like it's every rock audience I've ever heard just the crowd just explodes because the theme from Sonic is about to play.
Yeah.
I mean, and it is interesting that this sort of culture, and it's not unique, it's not something that just arrived, but it's interesting that it's found a much wider audience as the sort of larger geek community has grown as far as what's popular culture is about.
Well, I think you can describe it as being grown both in quantity of people that engage in it, but also in the fact that the people who were, captivated by these systems and these experiences, have matured, and their enthusiasm hasn't diminished for them. We're talking about video games in a larger context at this point, but I can't imagine the trajectory of my life without the inclusion of video games, and it's it's been the subject of debate amongst like me and my parents, for instance, but I distinctly remember in playing games with my dad and seeing his enthusiasm for them as well.
I kind of wondered, maybe you guys can all speak to that as well. Did you come by I'm wondering to what degree everyone came by their exposure to video games from, for lack of a better way of describing it, for my generation. We got the first taste of the arcades. And did we translate that love on to another generation, or was it something that you just were exposed to through a television commercial or a magazine? Like Robbie, you said you kind of started playing games with your dad.
I can tell you specifically how mine occurred if you'll permit me.
Sure.
My dad, I believe I was 5 at the time, purchased a Nintendo Entertainment System, the original NES, and it included Super Mario Brothers, of course. And I don't have memory of this because I was so young, but I'm told that the night that we got it, he and I spent the night taking turns back and forth trying to arrive at the Bowser boss in the castle and failing repeatedly, and I must have fallen asleep before seeing how far my dad could get with it. But I woke up the next day on the couch next to my dad, asleep with the system still on, and I roused my dad and I said, Dad, are you awake? And he mumbled and opened his eyes and he said, I beat the dragon. And then he fell back asleep.
What about you? What was really your first exposure?
It was also through my father. We call him Father in the house. No.
Oh, Father.
No, we grew up calling my dad Daddy. It's weird now. Anyhow, the first game that I remember playing with him was probably Mario from the NES. But I remember distinctly playing Contra with him and putting the old up, down, left, right, so on.
The first cheat code.
Yes, and we used that.
A necessary cheat code. Yeah.
We used that to beat the game. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
Jeremy, how about you?
My daddy has always been very against video games, but I had an older brother who I guess got an NES for his birthday. So probably when I was I was probably 5 or something, and he was a little older. He got the Nintendo, and I played a lot of Batman, one of the hardest games I've ever played. A lot of Willow, Willow, Robin Hood, Fester's Quest.
Robin Hood game. Oh,
I like that Robin Hood
just
game.
getting out of the cell in the Robin Hood game is something else, man.
But yeah, then a lot of Mario, and then once we got the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo collected dust for a while.
We were a Genesis family.
Yeah, we never got any Sega
Genesis
games
family
at home.
too.
We never got any
insofar
Sega.
as I was a me when the Genesis came out. But yeah, I was a Genesis fan myself. And we were, as we've kind of veered a little bit into video games more generally, like I said, this hasn't been, I mean, these things haven't been in a vacuum, really. Andrew, you had found a huge collection of places in which arcades featured in major motion pictures, charting the whole course of its evolution.
Yeah, and I'll put the source in my show notes. I have both a video and an article for you guys. But in 1973, Computer Space, which we spoke about earlier, was in Soylent Green, which I mentioned. In Rancho Deluxe, 1974, it features a scene with Jeff Bridges and Harry Dean Stanton playing Pong, and it looks like Jeff Bridges is losing. Jaws in 1975 had a game, Killer Shark. It also had Computer Space, which we were talking about, the cabinet earlier, and a game called Wild Cycle. Dawn of the Dead in 1978 had the games Gunfight, Night Driver, Starship 1, which is an Atari game, Quack or Quacky, Atari's F1 and Sprint 2. The Thing in 1981 had Asteroid Deluxe. Koyaanisqatsi, The Life Out of Balance in 1982 had portions of Turbo, Popeye, Pac-Man, Q*bert, Defender, and Robotron.
Not to interrupt you, but I believe it's actually pronounced Koyaanisqatsi.
Okay, and War Games in 1982 had Galaga. Karate Kid in 1984 had Galaga as well, a game called Kicks, and Moon Patrol. Gremlins in 1984 had Donkey Kong, Star Wars, and Crystal Castles. The Last Starfighter in 1984.
Last Starfighter.
Featured the game The Last Starfighter.
Do you know, did they ever make, because I don't remember that actually being in, like, as much as I wanted, I looked at every arcade as a kid because
you two
really,
wanted to be recruited by an intergalactic
dream. That is the dream of every kid playing an arcade game in that time and place, was you wanted to, you'd be playing the game and then the space aliens would come and you get to be a space pilot.
Yeah, you wanted to transcend the virtual reality you were being presented with an actual reality.
Wish fulfillment. That movie was wish fulfillment for that generation of arcade gamers.
That is really an example of games as escapism.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Which they certainly are.
Better Off Dead in 1985 had Gorf, Robotron, and Pac-Man. The Last Dragon in 1985 had Miss Pac-Man, Bubbles, Joust, Star Rider, Space Ace, Galaga, Cliffhanger, Dragon's Lair, and Tron. Ferris Bueller's Day Off 1986 had The Bears, Karate Champ, and Donkey Kong. We'd also see Karate Champ 2 years later in Bloodsport, which has a you guys remember that scene?
Oh yeah.
Parenthood in 1989 had Bad Dudes, which I just love the intro.
Two Bad Dudes, wasn't that the game?
Yeah. It's like they have to rescue the president.
Yeah, are you a bad enough dude to rescue the president's daughter?
It was part of that early 90s. The like we were just talking, the side scroller 2-player beat 'em ups.
Yeah. For a moment, I think I just want to divert and talk about the importance of Bloodsport to specifically video gaming, because it really serves, along with a couple of other things, as the foundation for what would eventually become Mortal Kombat. The Johnny Cage character is Charles Dukes, right? That's his name, Charles Dukes, right? Frank Dukes, not Charles.
Frank Dukes.
Shame on me. And that alongside with Big Trouble in Little China, that's the Three Storms. Is that what their names? Yeah, the Three Storms basically served as the inspiration for Raiden.
Makes sense now, but I hadn't made that connection before. Yeah. But you can see it now that you mention it.
But yeah, those two films are canonically important to
well, and I can recall, and right around the time that you've reached on your timeline, there was a show. It was a game show called Starcade, and it was how part of its purpose was the game manufacturers could sort of showcase a new game, but it was a kid and his father or mother, depending, and the whole game show was playing cabinet arcade games, and they would play some that they'd already played, but like if you were the final round of the game show was you were getting to play a game no one had gotten to play yet, be it a new Bally, a new Midway. And I can recall, this huge gulf between how good the dads were, because these weren't dads who grew up in an arcade like the next generation was going to have. These were dads who grew up talking about annuities and reading the Wall Street Journal. And they're because Timmy really wants to win Starcade, they're going to man up and try playing whatever this Crystal Castles thing is. and you could just see the befuddlement on their faces. And it was always really interesting to see, like, there would be like one dad in 100 who went like, yeah, I go to the arcade with my kid. And he'd get in and just whoop butt. And the other dude's wearing a sweater vest and can't quite figure out how to use the jump button.
Further on the timeline, I only have a few items left here. Back to the Future 2 in 1989 had the Wild Gunman. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 1990, probably in the scene that featured what's that guy's name from Moon?
Sam Rockwell?
Sam Rockwell as a kid.
I didn't know that.
Oh, wow.
Was the game Narc was prominently shown.
Oh, I remember Narc.
Yeah. Juice, the aforementioned Juice in 1992 had Street Fighter, and one of my favorite scenes in Grosse Point Blank is a guy playing Doom while listening to Guns N' Roses and not knowing that there's a gun battle going on right behind him. That's just some of the stuff that I found.
I mean, and I can remember as far as the television aspect of it, by the early 80s, it had become so much a part of the public consciousness that there was like a Saturday morning, I want to say ABC did it. It was a Saturday morning show. It was called like Saturday Morning Arcade Showcase or something. I apologize that I don't have that exact title, but it was like Donkey Kong, Q*bert, Frogger, and maybe one other property. It was another arcade game at the time. And you would get like little episodes of an animated series based around those arcade games. And that was maybe the first time I can remember them actually attempting to sort of cartoonize what kids were playing in the arcades.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody else remembers, but on Nickelodeon, they had a game that featured kids competing in a bunch of different types of games. But one of the portions of the television show had them playing against each other in arcade cabinets. Did I just make this up?
I wouldn't surprise me again.
The only thing I remember Double Dare. I remember Legends of the Hidden Temple, but I don't know if I remember this one.
If anybody has an answer for this, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm hallucinating.
It was a fever dream.
It sounds vaguely familiar, but yeah.
One thing I did find after researching this stuff is right around 1992, 1995, you stop seeing new games in these films. You start to see, obviously they've shown arcades in movies since the mid 90s, but since then it's always an old game in a dilapidated state in some bar in the middle of nowhere.
The sequel to Tron, where he goes into what had been Flynn's arcade. It was his dad's arcade, and now it's just covered in sheets. And
it became a symbol for antiquation. And,
but is it still? I'm sorry, Jeremy. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to remark on the style of arcade cabinet games that exist today. The new 3D next generation arcade games. Yeah, I've never seen one of like the Terminator game with the gun or, one of those, the motorcycle games. I've never seen one of those in a movie. You always see Pac-Man or, asteroids or something.
Yeah, I'm wondering though, because there are starting to be more what we would consider, it's sort of another renaissance of the arcade as an entity that you go to play. I mean, just here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area from Revolving Culture Towers, our headquarters here, within driving distance, there's two of a new franchise called Round One. They're starting to put those in all over the place. I think that's more of a chain, and that's a huge. I mean, that's bowling plus an enormous arcade, but they're more the arcade. They're bringing in the new games out of Japan. But there's also a place called Free Play here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which is, as I mentioned before, is as accurate a representation of a legitimate 1982 arcade. It's like a time machine. You've just walked through a door into 1982, and it is nothing but vintage arcade cabinets. And the time I was there on a Wednesday, when school is in session and people are at work, 2 days after it had been announced that this place existed in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, within 20 minutes of my arriving, when they unlocked the doors, there was 30 people of varying ages in there playing these old, because this particular business model isn't quarter based. It's you pay a set fee of $5 or $10. You get your wristband. Every game is free. There is no sink and a quarter in it. There's simply hit player one and start playing. But it was interesting to see such a wide variety of, there was a kid, obviously a young man who had grown up in the 90s, teaching what I'm assuming to be his little brother. His little brother looked to be he looked to be in his early 30s. His little brother looked to be in his, maybe 11, 12. And he was exposing him to Street Fighter. Like, these were his games that he played. And he's like, yeah, this is what we used to do. Mm-hmm. And it was a really fascinating look that I think maybe we're getting to where that's not a symbol of antiquation so much anymore as it is a symbol of classicism. It's classic now, not sort of dust filled and obsolete. Yeah. It is now, it has value because it's a classic. And Pac-Man and Donkey Kong.
That might be like an example of video games being seen more as an art form nowadays, as opposed to like a means of passing time. And we've talked about how people make money off of them. And the way arcade games are going now, at least according to what I've seen at like Round One and places like that, you get rhythm games from Japan. You get these the experience is supposed to invoke the feeling of actually engaging in the activity.
Yeah, the simulation games.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think to elaborate on what Marty was saying about this reverence for these older styles, you can see that manifested in the kind of mobile games that are popular nowadays, because those mobile games, oftentimes have the same objective that these arcade games do, or that we're ultimately, structured on, which is the idea of I need what is probably just meant to be a quick distraction for 5 minutes. If you were to go on the App Store for right now and to type the word retro or pixel or something like that, you would be met with hundreds of examples of newly developed games by designers either of an age that they grew up with those, or frankly, a lot of younger ones who, didn't, who arrived like in the Xbox generation.
Yeah.
And, but see the interest and the value and the need to represent that style, even though you can argue that it's antiquated. It's like, well, we've moved beyond that. Those styles were, a limitation of the technology, but, I had previously said in an episode about, I'd mentioned somebody who said that, a lot of art is defined by its limitation. It was specifically Brian Eno. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys an update on that there was an actual person that said those words, but, it's a reverence for what came before and a need to preserve it, whether it's by having an arcade where, you can come and play these old games and somebody can, of a older generation can share that experience with somebody of a younger generation, or somebody who is younger and doesn't necessarily want to revisit that exact same experience, but wants to build a new one, with the same, ideas and the same values that drove those original experiences.
It's kind of an idea that we wanted to explore. It's probably a month or two away before we drop that episode, but it's retrofuturism, how we look back and take all these disparate ideas and mold them into this new art form, basically.
Yeah, the way that we're doomed to repeat everything, for better or worse. Yeah.
Well, and in kind of talking about, like I said, that experience, it was watching the guy teaching his younger brother how to play Street Fighter. This maybe as good a time as any to talk about our personal reminiscences about the arcade, our experiences with the arcade culture. Robbie, did you want to go first?
Yeah. So when I think about young me at the arcades, I go to a very particular moment. When I was younger, my sister and I, there's a water park in DFW called Hurricane Harbor, and naturally, we're there in the summer months, and I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar with the heat that Texas experiences during the summer,
It's
but
biblical.
it's a little overbearing. So one of the natural places that you could get some relief from the heat in at the water park was the arcade, because it was housed and air conditioned, and the lights were off, and it was just a place where you could immediately get out of the heat. And naturally, as a kid who was inclined to video games, I wound up spending a lot of time in there to begin with. And this was the 90s, when really it was the one-on-one fighting games that were most prevalent. And I remember seeing what it meant to be good at one of those video games. There was a guy playing the first Killer Instinct game, and the mechanics of that game, all of these fighting games typically have some kind of combo system, whereby if you get the drop on your opponent, you can carry out this long string of attacks, and most of the games require you to input those commands as they're happening. But Killer Instinct was a little different. Killer Instinct, you can basically front load the entire combo, the inputs ahead of time, and then watch it play out. And so this guy who had a real talent for it, was just person after person would come up and challenge him, and eventually he would get the drop on them, and he would input this hilariously long combo that takes a solid 15 seconds to play out, and would basically wipe out his opponent. He would input all of those commands and then step away, cool as a cucumber, from the cabinet, go down, reach for his soda, take a nice long sip out of his soda, and then by the time he's had his little breather, he probably could have smoked a cigarette in the time that it takes for these combos to play out. He'd arrive back to it, and the person would realize they'd lost and walk away sullen, and he would just wordlessly continue on to the next opponent. And I thought that was the epitome of cool.
Yeah, there's a beauty in somebody being really good at something.
There's beauty always in seeing somebody show their talent for something, and I witnessed it that day.
Was that called an ultimate combo?
Oh yeah, and it was great as a spectator, yeah, because the whole time the announcer is like, ultra combo. Yeah.
What about you, Andrew? What kind of reminiscences do you have?
I remember going to a lockout whenever I was in middle school with the Baptist kids. I grew up Catholic and never really had. That's another story for another time in terms of my religious upbringing. But
comparative theology, not really.
I had friends who were either Methodist or Catholic, and I'd go to their youth group stuff. I'm guessing they were trying to get me to go to the church and stuff. But we went to a lock-in at GameWorks in the Grapevine Mills Mall.
Oh, wow.
In
I remember that place.
Grapevine, Texas, and we stayed the night there from 8 p.m. whenever the mall closed until 8 a.m. or something. And I remember playing House of the Dead and grabbing, because everything was free. We didn't have to spend any money, and I would just grab both guns and sit there and fire at zombies with both guns.
Straight up John Woo.
Yeah, it was awesome. But yeah, I had a good time doing that. That's good.
Jeremy, how about you? What
I never had really an arcade experience. My parents viewed it as a waste of quarters, and
that needs to change. We need to take Jeremy on.
No, I mean, I've played arcade games to load since, but I didn't feel like I was missing out because I had a Nintendo, a Super Nintendo, and later an N64 at home PlayStation. I was spoiled by the availability of video games in the privacy of my home, and didn't feel like I needed to partake in the cultural experience of social, community, social arcading.
Can you think of any moments at home when you were perhaps playing with friends or something? Any standout memories of any one game?
The first time I played Final Fantasy VII, my brother, I think he had just got a PS1 or something, and I stayed up way past my bedtime. My parents didn't know I was in there playing it. I don't think we had a memory card. And I didn't realize you needed one to save.
Oh, that's so sad.
And my dad had asked me 12 times to go to bed, told me 12 times to stop playing, go to bed. And he came in eventually and just shut the thing off or unplugged it or something. And I screamed.
Long story short.
Jeremy hurts for sure.
I can vaguely remember, there's maybe a couple. One would be maybe the first time I ever saw Dragon's Lair. Like the first time I walked into the arcade, the Le Mans arcade in Ponk City, Oklahoma, and there's a line of about 3 people in front of something new. And so you'd stand in line with your quarter, and you finally get up there and you'd put that money in a Don Bluth cartoon would start up. And you were just like, at that time and in that place, that was extraordinary technology. And you got it for about 12 seconds because it was very unforgiving and there was no sort of do-overs. You died 3 times in about 12 seconds and your quarter was done. So I can kind of remember that, but maybe the bigger memory I have is of my mom and my stepdad and I going on a trip. We were in Arkansas, if I remember correctly, and we'd stomped off at this little go-kart place. And they had a little arcade and then a go-kart track, and I'd played on the go-karts, and I was playing Q*bert. And this is in the early days when Q*bert had the little metal ball that when he fell off of you'd hear the metal ball drop, and you just heard him land at the bottom of the arcade machine. And my stepdad started playing it, who wouldn't have known an arcade game prior to that if it had come up and beat him with a shovel. But he started playing Q*bert and really enjoyed it. And he's like, that was a great game. Do they have that for your little Atari? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. So we went to the store and bought the Atari 2600 version of Q*bert. And he sat down to play it. It didn't look anything like the arcade. This really kind of sucks,
pale
without
imitation
using
of
that. And so within a month or so, at that point in time, around October, November, you got the JCPenney's wish book for Christmas. Like the catalog of all catalogs. And there in the back of that catalog was a ColecoVision ad, and it showed Q*bert. Very arcade accurate version of Q*bert. And he saw that, and strangely enough, I got a ColecoVision for Christmas that year. And
except no substitutes.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thrilled to death because that was if you wanted the arcade in your house, ColecoVision was about the only game in town at that point. And Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. and Q*bert and Zaxxon were all like A-list titles for that. But I can remember I would have never gotten anything remotely like that, because it was just a lot of money at that time. But it's for Marty. But he played that ColecoVision. He played Q*bert only. He had no passion for really any other game. But he would play Q*bert for hours on end. And so I can always think that that one little arcade got me what was the penultimate gaming system of its day in front of all of my other friends. I had a ColecoVision first simply because my stepdad became addicted to Q*bert.
I want to talk briefly, because Marty basically describing the story of somebody looking for the most, true to the arcade experience that money can buy. And, the company that really embraced that idea was Neo Geo.
Yeah.
And when the Neo Geo, home system was debuted, that really is the example of we're going to give you in the most literal sense, the arcade experience, because what you're buying is the hardware that you would find inside one of our arcade cabinets, and the cartridge that you're going to buy is precisely what you would find inside one of our arcade cabinets, and a price tag came with it. It was exorbitantly expensive. I believe I believe it was $700 or $800 for the system itself, and then an additional $200 to $300 per game. But if you were a person who was ready to have exactly what you experience in the arcade, and you had the money to spare, you could have it because of Neo Geo.
Yeah, and just to maybe bring this to a good conclusion, if in listening to this you kind of want to try and grab that feel of the arcades, again, they're popping up everywhere. Look around Google your local locations. The old man in me says check the yellow pages. I don't know that that's
while doing my research, I found a website that has a community of people who update with local arcades around them. It's called Arcade.com. It's AURCADE. They don't have all of the ones in our area, but they have a pretty exhaustive list.
So you can, depending on where you live, look around. You'll probably find there's a great place to go and experience some of these arcade games, whether vintage or new, because we're starting to see a lot of those. So if you want access in your home, maybe to the real vintage arcade games, there is a place, if you go to archive.org/details/internet arcade, there is a huge, and I mean huge, selection of the arcade games from the period of late 70s through the early 80s that we've kind of been talking about, and probably on further in towards the 90s. All, as best I can tell, majority of them all playable in a form of Flash using an emulator. You can also download them if you happen to be someone who has a MAME emulator. But it is really a really well really well curated collection of vintage arcade games. So certainly go get that a check out. We're probably going to go ahead and call this a good conclusion point. We're going to go and wrap this one up. Certainly join us next time. We've got a lot of great topics coming up. You're going to want to stick around with us. As always, we would really like to hear your feedback. Get in contact with us. Join us in our discussions. You can visit us online at revolvingculture.com. Give us a like on Facebook. Visit us there. We are Revolving Culture Podcast. Check out our Instagram and Twitter, and you can communicate with us there at RevCult Podcast. And then certainly give us likes on iTunes. Let us know what you like about what we're doing, what you don't necessarily like about what we're doing. We're always looking to hear from everybody. We are Revolving Culture Podcast on iTunes. I am Marty on behalf of the panel. We certainly thank you for joining us, and we look forward to you joining us again in the future. So everyone have a wonderful week, and good night.
Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Goodbye.